Have we talked about Sean Combs lately? Well, I'll tell you what, there have been some updates going on in his legal world, and we're going to do a recap of some of those developments for you right now as his criminal trial is quickly approaching. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, so it's time to do a recap of some of the latest details in the Sean Combs case, if you haven't been following it day in and day out like we have been doing here on Sidebar. So the first thing that we have to address is arguably one of the biggest developments in the past few weeks in regards to his criminal case. And remember, Combs is charged with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking of victim one using force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. That he was operating this criminal enterprise that was engaged in a whole set of illegal activity, but really we're talking about the exploitation and abuse of women on a large scale. So with that in mind, Combs' attorneys recently filed a letter asking Judge Arun Subramanian to order the prosecution to electronically produce videos of the freak-offs. And remember what these are, right? Prosecutors allege that Combs would intimidate, threaten, and lure women into these extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers using force, threats, coercion, that Combs filmed and recorded these freak-offs as a way to have collateral to use something against these victims. And the reason the defense wants these electronically produced, the reason they want copies of these in their possession, why they want these videos for them to review and analyze, and why they need the court to step in, is because under the protective order in this case regarding how evidence will be viewed and disseminated, the video evidence is available for inspection only. And according to the defense, federal prosecutors refused to produce that over to them, and obviously that is not an advantage to the defense. They want to be able to review this at their own time and when they want. But this is even more important. Combs' lawyers argue that we need these videos because they prove our client didn't commit the crimes he's charged with. In their letter, they write, quote, "Having reviewed these videos, it is now abundantly clear that they confirm Mr. Combs' innocence and that their full exculpatory value cannot be investigated and used unless they are electronically produced. The 9 videos at issue are the so-called freak-off tapes with victim one that the government has repeatedly referenced, causing wild speculation in the media. Contrary to what the government has led this court and the public to believe, the so-called freak-offs were private sexual activity between fully consenting adults in a long-term relationship. Like many Americans in the privacy of their own bedrooms, they sometimes filmed their sexual activity. These videos unambiguously show that the person alleged in the indictment to be victim one not only consented, but thoroughly enjoyed herself." And we believe, by the way, victim one to be Cassandra Ventura. This is Diddy's ex, who first filed that initial sexual assault lawsuit against Combs back in 2023. She was in that infamous surveillance footage that was published by CNN of an incident that happened in a hotel hallway where Combs is beating Ventura just while wearing a towel. It's a very disturbing video. He argues the videos don't show any orgies or celebrities or violence or coercion or threats or manipulation or evidence of anyone being under the influence of drugs, that this is not sex trafficking. Quote, "The premise that freak-offs are inherently dangerous shows that the government seeks to police non-conforming sexual activity and that it assumes, despite all evidence to the contrary, that a woman's willing participation must have been coerced." That's interesting because that's something we've long suspected, that the defense is not going to shy away from the term freak-offs. They might accept, yeah, Combs called these freak-offs, but this was entirely consensual. It was all on the up and up. It might be different to you and me, but there's nothing illegal going on here. By the way, going through all these legal issues with Sean Combs, particularly the lawsuits, let me take a second to call out the exclusive personal injury law firm of Law&Crime, our sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. This is a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why? Because they win a lot. In the past few months, Morgan & Morgan secured a $29 million verdict for a bicyclist in Philadelphia, a $2.7 million verdict for a car accident victim in Florida, not to mention $5.6 million for a car crash victim in Georgia. And this was after insurance offered that client $0. Even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? And Morgan & Morgan makes it truly so simple because you can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. Now, we spoke with criminal defense attorney Bradford Cohen about this, and this is somebody who has represented celebrities like Drake, Lil Wayne, Kodak Black. And the question is, based on the defense's characterization of these tapes, is that the end of the prosecution's case? Maybe not quite.
By no means do I think this is any good for the state if it is the government, if it is exactly what they're saying that it is, if it depicts everything that they're saying, if the defense is right and it depicts these things, by no means is it good for the state, for the government. Is the question really becomes, how are they going to use those tapes? Are they using the tapes? Obviously, she's going to have to testify that she was under physical and mental abuse, and that's why she participated in these things. Whether or not a jury believes that is going to be a very big leap. But do I think that's the only evidence they have? Probably not. If the government is the government in the Southern District of New York, I can't imagine this is what they're hanging their hat on if it's what the defense describes. It's like one of those things that when you have a weakness in a case, the government has to decide how they're going to use that. My guess is they're going to use it to show that there were sex workers, that these sex workers were paid. I would imagine that they have the sex workers that are in the video to come in and describe what was going on or what happened before they went on tape, whether or not they had drugs or alcohol or anything else, whether or not Cassie had drugs or alcohol, whether or not there was a discussion between Sean Combs and Cassie before the tape started. So right. I think that the tape is going to be one portion of it, but the testimony of either the sex workers that were in the video and or Cassie is going to kind of tie it together. That's my guess.
Now, something else to address here with respect to Sean Combs' argument here. His attorneys say that these tapes weren't even seized from Combs' properties. So the idea that he had these secret tapes of freak-offs as collateral to be used against anybody like Victim 1 who turned against him, that's false. They claim that Victim 1 kept these videos on her own device for years and that Victim 1 produced them to the government. Now, from there, Combs' defense attorney argues that Combs has a right to copies of these videos by law, that it's backed up by his due process rights to defend himself, how a defendant is entitled to exculpatory evidence to be turned over by the prosecution, that even the federal rules of criminal procedure require this. Well, the prosecution responded in their own letter, and they argued the defense judge violated the protective order in this case because they included in their filing, quote, unredacted descriptions and characterizations of material designated AEO. This is attorney's eyes only. And they argue that this threatens the privacy of the victims. They shouldn't have disclosed what these tapes were about. And they are asking the court to remove it from the public filing, have it be refiled with redactions. Well, the defense responded in a follow-up letter, and they said, look, court, we will make these requested redactions. We're not happy about it, and we want the court to actually step in, allow us to refile this later on with narrower redactions. Why? Because we believe that the government's request here was way too overbroad, especially because the government has already told everybody what these freak-offs are about. They have been quite explicit and specific about freak-offs. And the defense argues that there is a presumption of public access here. This is about the government's key piece of evidence in their criminal case against Combs, the freak-offs. And they say that his trial rights are being compromised by not having proper access to this material. They write, quote, indeed, the public can only have confidence in the consciousness, reasonableness, or honesty of judicial proceedings if the documents on which judges rely are publicly available. And they say the government provides no adequate rationale or reason for sealing this information. I'm going to read you part of what they say. They write, while Victim 1 may have privacy interests that justify keeping the videos themselves under seal at this stage, including details of the content of the videos, the fact that Victim 1 was filmed while participating in the so-called freak-offs is public information. Indeed, the government has publicized that these were extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers and elaborate and produced sex performances that were electronically recorded. The government has publicized gratuitous details, including the use of baby oil, lubricant, extra linens and lighting, room damage, delivery of IV fluids. The government even held a press conference publicizing the seizure of more than 1,000 bottles of personal lubricant and baby oil. And the government has publicly asserted that during the freak-offs, alleged victims were subjected to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse, including being hit, kicked, and dragged, and that alleged victim claims are corroborated by videos of the freak-offs. Faulting the defense for characterizing that same evidence as exculpatory and consensual is an unfair double standard and demonstrates the government's intent to mislead the public and the court. In other words, they're saying, government, you already told everybody what all this is about. We're not going to give you specific details about the sex acts right now. But look, we're allowed to provide our own characterization of what's going on. You certainly did. Now, moving on. Another big update in the Sean Combs legal saga is the pretrial schedule in the criminal case. And we've talked about this before. There was a battle between the prosecution and the defense over this, and the court had to step in and set a schedule about what's going to happen. So, for example, on February 1st, the Enterprise letter is due. This is big. I want everybody to pay attention to this date because that letter, filed by the prosecution, it should be laying out the specific acts and conduct that it says proves the racketeering conspiracy. So maybe dates, maybe times, maybe places, maybe the participants, maybe each illegal racketeering act. What are we talking about here? You know, we have all been waiting for more clarity and specifics in this case, so we may get that. February 1st, keep an eye out for that date. Then, on February 17th, both sides need to have their pretrial motions filed. 2 weeks after that, opposition filings are due. Then replies in those filings are due 1 week later on March 10th. And then when it comes to jury selection, which will most likely be quite the undertaking given Combs' worldwide celebrity and how much this case has been publicized, the proposed jury questionnaire forms are due April 11th. This is according to the judge's schedule. And that's essentially the first step, right? The forms that are going to be sent out to prospective jurors to gauge their eligibility for jury service. And by the way, talking about jury selection, that is going to be tough, trying to find fair and impartial jurors, especially again when there is so much coverage of Combs in the past year or so, and that includes being exposed to so many claims and so many lawsuits. Which brings me to another update when it comes to Sean Combs. This is not on the criminal front, this is on the civil front. So a new sexual assault lawsuit has been filed. This was filed in New York State Court on Monday. It names Sean Combs, companies like Bad Boy Records, Combs Enterprises LLC, and also two unnamed John Does. Now, in Jane Doe's verified civil complaint, it reads, quote, plaintiff brings suit against defendants to redress the substantial and lifetime injuries she has suffered as a result of being drugged, sexually assaulted, and abused by Sean Combs or P. Diddy, while co-defendants facilitated and or directly participated in the action of Combs. And she is suing for violation of New York's Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Act. We've talked about this before. This is a law that created a look-back window for victims to come forward and file claims, even if the statute of limitations would have normally run out. And as of March 1st, 2023, under this law, victims could pursue civil claims against their perpetrators for past offenses, no matter when they happened. That look-back window closes soon, though. It's set to expire on March 1st, 2025. But the key is that it has to be an act of violence that is motivated by an animus towards someone's gender. And sexual assault could be argued to be just that. Now, according to the complaint, Jane Doe grew up in Lower Manhattan. She was 16 years old and living with her father and stepmother when she started working part-time as a babysitter in a building around the corner. And she says that one of the women who lived in that building she describes as a, quote, well-known woman with whom the defendant, meaning Sean Combs, was in a relationship. Now remember, Combs had started his meteoric rise to the top of the hip-hop world during the 90s. He was a very well-known name at this point, especially in New York City, because this all concerns events that took place on or about and between late August or early September 2000, again, when she was just 16 years old. That is when, the claim is, that just before school started, plaintiff was working as a babysitter in the building where Combs' romantic partner lived. As she left the babysitting job and was exiting the building, the plaintiff came upon Combs, who was in the presence of two male individuals who apparently worked for him. Combs was sitting in a car with the door open. Combs engaged her in conversation, asking where she was going so late at night, and that it was not safe for her to be walking alone. She advised Combs that she lived around the corner, was familiar with the neighborhood, and would be fine. Combs offered her a ride home several times, which she continued to refuse. After much cajoling by Combs, she agreed and got into his car. Quote, getting into Combs' car that day was something plaintiff would come to regret forever. During the ride, plaintiff became scared when they did not drop her off at home as promised. The defendant gave her a drink to, quote, calm her down. She soon became groggy and unsteady. And then it says that Combs and his staff, the two male co-defendants, proceeded to a location where she was sexually assaulted by Combs. And this is something that's been alleged time and time again against Sean Combs, that he or his associates would use tainted drinks to make victims compliant. According to Jane Doe, when Combs was through with her, they dropped her off. The complaint states she was eventually taken home and left in the lobby of her building by the same driver, John Doe 1 and or John Doe 2, who was present when she was picked up. And the lawsuit continues. Given the extensive media coverage of Combs' abusive treatment of women, defendants Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Inc. and Combs Enterprises, LLC had knowledge and were put on notice of the sexual abuse allegations made against him. And that's a way to get them on the hook, right? You know, they say they should be responsible. I'm not sure if that's going to be sufficient, because usually you hold the company liable if the employee was acting within the scope of his employment or was using company resources to commit the offense, but enabling his behavior, his control over the companies, maybe there's something there. And yes, this lawsuit on its face is quite bare bones. There's not a lot of evidence backing it up. You know, her account is very similar to other lawsuits that we have seen that is based primarily on the alleged victim's account. And we don't know if there's going to be text messages or photos or videos. Again, this is from 2000, but also that may all come out during the course of discovery. When you file a complaint, it's just a lower standard to merely file a complaint. You just need to make the statements that are sufficiently particular, that make clear what the claims are, that provide the parties notice of what's being alleged and what the elements of the claims are. Now, Combs' legal team responded to this latest lawsuit in a statement to People magazine, saying, no matter how many lawsuits are filed, it won't change the fact that Mr. Combs has never sexually assaulted or sex trafficked anyone, man or woman, adult or minor. We live in a world where anyone can file a lawsuit for any reason. Fortunately, a fair and impartial judicial process exists to find the truth, and Mr. Combs is confident he will prevail in court. Now, Jane Doe is requesting a trial by jury, seeking a judgment against the defendant in, quote, a sum to be determined at a trial of this action and any further relief that the court deems is proper. Now, talking lawsuits, we got another update for you in a separate, reportedly $50 million lawsuit that was filed against Sean Combs. So the federal judge overseeing another case, another sexual assault case brought by Ashley Parham, who claims that Combs threatened her with a knife and she was then gang raped by Combs and others. Well, the judge says she might have to throw this whole case out. Why? Well, Fox KTVU reports that the judge may throw the case out because Parham failed to properly serve Combs with the lawsuit in time, as per the federal rules of civil procedure. She had to serve Combs and his co-defendants within 90 days of filing the complaint, and it was filed on October 15th last year. The deadline's up. She hasn't served him. Now, the judge did extend the deadline to February 14th to show proof of service. Otherwise, this case will get tossed. It could be refiled, but it will be dismissed immediately. But Parham's attorney, Ariel Mitchell, who we interviewed here on Sidebar previously, said it's hard to serve Sean Combs because he's in jail. He's in the Metropolitan Detention Center, and that he can refuse mail. Now, there's been a little back and forth on that, or whether or not an inmate can really refuse it, or whether or not you just serve it on the officials there, and that's proof of service. But we'll see how that one shakes out and whether or not this case actually gets dismissed. But you know what's interesting about that lawsuit, about Parham, is that she claims in her lawsuit she may have been assaulted by Sean Combs as a form of retaliation, as revenge. Because she claims that when Combs' friend had tried to introduce her to Sean Combs over a FaceTime call initially, she had made a comment to the effect of that she didn't want to talk to him because Combs had a hand in the killing of rapper Tupac Shakur back in 1996. You remember when he was gunned down in Las Vegas? She claims Sean Combs allegedly took offense to that and wanted to make her pay. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, we have another update for you when it comes to Sean Combs. You see, Sean Combs' former bodyguard, Gene Deal, sat down for a new documentary that aired on Peacock. Now, Deal, who reportedly served as Combs' bodyguard from 1991 to 2005, spoke on Diddy, the making of a bad boy, that, again, aired on Peacock. And on that documentary, when asked about whether Combs played a role in the death of another famed rapper, Combs' friend and artist, Notorious B.I.G. Biggie, Christopher Wallace, remember he died, he was shot dead in Los Angeles. Well, Gene Deal said on the documentary, so did he directly have something to do with it? He could have. Yeah, this just came out that he said that. And Gene Deal bases that off of his perception that Sean Combs was acting a little weird leading up to the 24-year-old's death. He says on the show, the week in which Biggie was murdered, he was just acting real anxious and trying to get Big at this party. And what was crazy was Big was telling people he had to be in London, but Puff was telling people he ain't going to London that whole week. So you fast forward to the day of the party, and Deal says, I'm sitting up at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and I get a phone call. It's about 9 o'clock, and they say, Gene, get ready. We going to the Vibe party. I was like, we going to this party? We don't have no security. And according to Deal, he tried to warn Combs that this probably wasn't a good idea. He said, yo, Puff, I got some intel, bruh. He said, what? I said, yo, man, if we go to this party tonight, one of us gonna get killed, somebody gonna die, because now we had East Coast, West Coast beef. He said, yo, Gene, I don't wanna hear that S, so we all jump in the car. Now, this was in reference to the infamous rivalry in the hip-hop world that lasted several years in the 90s between West Coast Death Row Records, so we're talking Suge Knight, Dr. Dre, Tupac Shakur, again, tragically killed in 1996 out in Las Vegas. Actually, some believe that Biggie was killed as retribution for Tupac's death. And then on the other side, you got the East Coast. We have Bad Boy Entertainment, Bad Boy Records, Combs' label, and he had his artist Biggie. And when you think, by the way, of Diddy and Biggie, you're thinking, more money, more problems, it's all about the Benjamins, victory. So Deal explains that what happens is they all leave this vibe party. And he says, I was in a car with Puff, Big was in his own car, and the next thing you know, you hear pow, 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 pow. Now, the FBI has stated that Biggie was in the passenger seat of a Chevy Suburban when a Chevy Impala pulled up at a red light and a shooter just opened fire, shot Biggie multiple times. And Deal tried to make sure, this is what he says in the documentary, that he tried to make sure that Biggie didn't go to sleep, that he wanted to keep him talking, to keep him alive. And according to Deal, they told him that they were taking him to the hospital, to which Deal claims Biggie replied, just do it. Deal says in the documentary, that's the last thing I heard Big say. Deal says, and they said the hospital was 2 blocks away, and that's the longest 2 blocks I ever seen in my life. Now, going back to Sean Combs, Deal says they go to the hospital. By the way, Biggie dies less than an hour after arriving, and Deal explains to Combs what's going on. Quote, so Puff ran out of the hospital door, and he grabbed my arm. He said, Gene, we gotta pray, we gotta pray, we gotta pray. And I knocked his hands off of me, and I said, pray for what? That end's dead, bruh. He was just stunned. He just seemed like he had this look in his eye, like he couldn't believe it, that he was dead. He couldn't believe it. Now, the documentary makes clear that Combs has always denied involvement in the killings of Biggie and Tupac. And in fact, Diddy's legal counsel, in response to the claims in this documentary, wrote, Sean Combs unequivocally denies the baseless allegations being circulated in connection with this documentary. Now, I actually spoke with veteran criminal defense attorney Brian McMonagle, who has represented stars like Meek Mill and Bill Cosby, about what effect this could have at Combs' upcoming trial. Take a listen.
I don't think this is going to have anything to do with his criminal trial.
Right.
But it's got everything to do with jury selection. It's got and it's got everything to do with just where he stands in the eyes of the public and perhaps his jury as he starts a trial.
Because in other words, what you're saying is this documentary, these words, that could taint a future jury.
There's no question about it. I mean, people watch these shows. I mean, some of these shows are great, obviously, and people watch them. And now they come into this trial not only with the allegations that are made against him in the indictment, but the idea that he might have been a party to a murder. And so it's dangerous for the defense just in terms of jury selection. And this is going to be something that they're going to have to use in jury selection to see if anybody's watched these documentaries, listen to them. And these will be jurors they're going to have to strike, you know, as they try to prepare for this trial.
All right, so there you have it. Some quick updates about what's happening in Sean Combs' world. There's obviously a lot going, but these are some of the bigger points that we saw. And to be clear, let me say this one more time. Combs has always maintained his innocence. He has entered a not guilty plea in federal court and reportedly told his attorneys he cannot wait to fight these allegations in court. And while Combs has previously settled that bombshell lawsuit that was filed against him by Cassandra Ventura back in 2023, he has never been found liable for any sexual misconduct in any of these lawsuits as of yet. And he and his attorneys have adamantly denied all claims of sexual assault. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.